So the green light will indicate when it's on, so we'll hear it on BCTV.
Right, Bothell City Council is now in session. Could you all please rise and join me for the flag salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call. All council members are present except for Mayor Freed, Councilmember Lamb, and Councilmember Evans, who are all absent and excused. And tonight we have a study session for AB 14184 on our legislative agenda. And we have, so far with this Representative Moscuso, and joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll have Representative Stanford and Senator McAuliffe later on. So with that, I'll turn this over to Attorney Joe Beck for our staff presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. At Council's request, we got an early start on our legislative priorities and started and set up a meeting with our legislators. I did have confirmation as late as yesterday that everybody would be attending, so I fully expect that Senator McAuliffe and Representative Stanford will be joining us shortly. In the meantime, I wanted to just remind everybody the purpose of this meeting. The only item on the agenda tonight is this study session with our legislators to discuss our city priorities and the upcoming legislative session. And you should all have copies of the legislative priorities as part of the packet. If anybody needs a copy, a paper copy, I can provide I brought some extras and I'll pass those around. It might be easier to refer to a paper copy if you would like.
Thank you.
One. And with that being said, I wanted to go over those priorities just briefly with you and recap what they are. They primarily have to do with funding, as you remember, and of great concern for the city is the Transportation Improvement Board funding, the Model Toxic Control Act funding, and the Public Works Trust Fund. Then in addition to that, the city is also facing, as other cities are, a tremendous burden from with regard to the costs of criminal prosecution. And this is coming at us from a number of different angles. We have expanded public defense requirements that we need to meet and that we are meeting, which raises the cost of public defense. We have the issue with regard to not only public defense, but also the costs of prosecuting increasingly complicated cases, given that the counties are not capable or not apparently not funded well enough to prosecute all felonies. The city is now prosecuting what would be felonies otherwise, and that is, as I explained, just an infinitely more complex case. So we have less cases that we can process with our resources, and they're more complicated cases. So that's a burden and that's a cost. And then on top of that, we have liquor revenue that has been lowered, and also the marijuana. Recreational marijuana tax that we would like to see the cities have a share of. So those are some of the issues with regard to the expanding burden and costs of municipal criminal prosecution. And so we wanted to have our legislators join us so that we could present those to them and discuss those with them. And we certainly appreciate your willingness to be with us here tonight. And so close to Thanksgiving, take a night out of your week. We appreciate it greatly. We don't take it lightly that you made the time for us to be here. And then, so we'd like to discuss those with you, with each of our legislators, and maybe ask some questions. Hopefully ask some questions. I'm relying on you, council, for that. And but before we get into sort of some back and forth dialogue, I thought it might be helpful for each of our legislators to, if you wish, I'm not going to force you to, but if you wish, to sort of relate your vision for this next session, what you see happening, how you see it going, how you hope it happens, and then provide any comment and insight regarding our legislative priorities. Just, it could be 30 seconds, 5 minutes, whatever is comfortable for you. So, since
Well, let's first off welcome Representative Stanford and Senator McAuliffe. They've joined us here, and so from there, I guess we can move into their.
Yeah. So do I have a volunteer? Okay.
Sure. That's always kind of expected. Thank you very much. I don't know if it's age or the Senate. I'm not sure which. Maybe a little of both. So, first of all, I am Rosemary McAuliffe, the senator from the 1st District, and have been in the Senate for 20 years and currently, sorry. Okay. All right. So, Rosemary McAuliffe, senator from the 1st District, and currently in the Senate for 20 years. I've served on education, human services, and corrections, and also higher ed, many various committees. So I've had a great broad experience. First of all, I want to compliment you as a city council, and particularly Deputy Mayor Del Spivey, for Cougar Way, which I think speaks to what the city is about, recognizing the people who live here and what they value. So I want to say that I have a street also named for John McGlure, so it's McGlure Way. So doing those kind of things for the community is really appreciated, because I think it shows what you value and what they value as a community. So what I think is important for us as a city to be doing this coming session is to make the capital request for the academic building at the University of Washington, Bothell. We need to continually support that campus and make sure that it continues to grow as it should and as the plan for its growth is. I think we're all pretty excited about what's going on around that campus, the buildings, the restaurants, the apartments. That's pretty exciting for Bothell as well. So just making sure that campus continues to grow. Also must bring up the fact that Cascadia is now a college. And it's not a community college any longer, but it's going to be a 4-year college as well. So they're moving as well and doing an excellent job. What we need to bring home this year from the legislature is a transportation package and a capital budget. Those are the two things I think that are my top priorities, is to make sure that the Senate can pass a transportation package that includes transit. And that, I think, was our big debate last time, was not being able to agree with the east part of the state as far as how transit works for our part of the state. So that and a capital budget is important. I know that public works is important to you, and it is important to me as well. But if I have to take my top 3, I guess I would say University of Washington, transportation, and then probably restoring the public work fund is important. So those are my 3. Either or.
You or me?
Position 1, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm Derek Stanford, State Rep for the 1st District.
Is your light lit?
It is on, yes.
Okay.
And so I serve as Vice Chair on the House Capital Budget Committee, which is very relevant to several of these priorities. So very happy to be able to work in depth on some of these issues. I've been working extensively on the Public Works Trust Fund last session, trying to get some resources restored to that. and I'll continue to do that. I completely agree that this is needed. I mean, these are really the best economic development projects because they get vetted both at the city level, at the local level, all around the state, and then projects that are prioritized there get sent up to the state level where they're vetted again and prioritized again. So we end up with really the highest impact projects, and it's worked well for decades. So very strong proponent of that, and hope to see that restored to the work that it's been doing, and the MOTCA funding, the Model Toxics Control Act funding as well, needs to be kept for exactly the kind of projects that you talk about here. There are always attempts to take that divert it to other uses, but this is exactly the kind of thing that it's there for, is to do these remediations that let areas get past that, get it dealt with, so that you can go on and develop. And Bothell, of course, I certainly join in supporting their request as well. So looking forward to working on these issues in the upcoming session, and the many others that will be facing us. Obviously, education funding is going to be a critical piece of what we're looking at in the operating side. So we all know that's going to be a big challenge, but on the capital budget side, I think we need to keep the resources there, for exactly the reasons you've outlined here, and I'll be trying to do that. Thanks.
Luis Moscoso, and first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting us to speak tonight. I think it's very important that we have this conversation, and as I was joking a little earlier, this is going to be a lot easier than when we get to Olympia in another 2 months. So this is going to be a good night to have these conversations. I also want to say how proud I am to be part of a delegation, which, as you've heard my colleagues already say, the three of us are positioned at this time and likely to stay in committees that deal with leadership positions on these areas of education, capital, and transportation, so that the city of Bothell and the 1st District are privileged, I think, to have legislators who are going to be playing key roles in carrying your message forward, as well as understanding the larger political dynamics, within our caucuses and across the rotunda between the houses. And this is something I think that we need to make sure you can appreciate in supporting us as we have leadership positions and also need to speak to the issues that we're talking about here. As co-vice chair of the Transportation Committee, it's been frustrating to spend at least the last session watching nothing get done that we need to have done, and how important that is, particularly to the 1st District and to Bothell. You probably heard me say a number of times that the arterial and state routes that cross in this district have created quite a bottleneck, and there's really no relief in sight unless we can answer these problems around transportation funding. I've also told some of you about this rail caucus that I've started, which is statewide, but it also has other impacts when I realize the fact that more people are paying attention to rail now, mostly because environmental issues around oil and coal, which are extremely important, and fortunately, I think, actually elevate this issue to a place we can now pay more attention to it. But it's really also about freight mobility and commuter and passenger work. To that extent, back to what's happening in the 1st District, I've been working a lot here on the East Side Rail Corridor issue, and I believe that Kirkland and Bothell are the linchpin communities to decide the fate of that corridor in the near future. I don't think anybody can doubt that the long-term plans that some of us have been paying attention to for a better part of 30 years now have not come to fruition. And looking at the budgetary issues, the problems we have now, what's coming out with Sound Transit now, and I think it's $15 billion for ST3 and other work, we're talking about another 20 years or more before we see any relief there, unless we come up with some other ways of working on that. And I have some ideas about that. I won't take up your time tonight, but I've talked to Mayor Freed about how we could be doing some things with the East Side Rail Corridor that I think would really benefit the city of Bothell if the city has the time to engage in the East Side discussion that's been picking up all the way from Snohomish, Woodinville, Kirkland, and a little bit of Bellevue and Redmond. So I would encourage the city to take some time. I'll sit down with you and let you know what we're trying to do there, because as that particular corridor, not just the rail, but, concomitantly, it also deals with transit and 405, and all those things pretty much have to be resolved together. So that's a different way of looking at it than we've seen up till now. So I'll be focusing a lot on transportation. The other issues around the, you mentioned before, Joe, about the criminal prosecution. I'm also on the Public Safety Committee and very concerned about how we can, address those problems for you. I've talked to the police chief here in town about issues that have been happening, locally, but also with this business in Ferguson we're all paying attention to now. I'm looking at working with law enforcement on making sure that as people are paying more attention to how law enforcement or community policing and folks interact, that we have a more constructive dialogue about what policing is supposed to be about in our communities. Because I see a lot of people understandably getting upset about this, and because I work a lot with law enforcement in Olympia, I'm concerned that they could become way too defensive and not engage in a more constructive dialogue. There's going to be an event in Seattle December 2nd about the militarization of the police. I have been talking to my committee about having a work session just to talk about it kind of at a low level, but now that I saw this particular workshop coming up, it's basically going to review everything that happened at WTO, and if any of you remember what was going on in Seattle then, even former Police Chief Norm Stanford is one of the panelists there. And if you've read his book, Breaking Rank, I think it's called, I think it's really going to incite a lot of people into a lot more conflictual discussion than I'd like to see happen in the legislature. But being on that committee, I feel a strong commitment that law enforcement has to have an opportunity to speak up and talk about, how they see the changing dangers that they face and what types of equipment they're going to need to do their job. So enough of that for the moment. The other thing about, you mentioned liquor and marijuana, I'm on that committee too that deals with those issues, and I'm already on record saying that we should be getting that money back to cities and counties that has been stripped out before from liquor sales and also on marijuana. I'm very disappointed that we've done such a poor job, in my opinion, in rolling out the recreational marijuana, and we've never done any kind of a decent job on medical marijuana. So forcing those two together seems to be the course we're on. I think it's going to create more problems, but no one has come up with another way of handling it. So as this relates to the city, and you probably heard of some problems out in Clearview and the ordinance that the county council recently passed, a temporary ordinance to deal with the proliferation of medical marijuana stores out in Clearview, we've got, I think, an issue here that I'd like us to get out in front of as we deal with the medical marijuana and recreational marijuana issues and zoning, all those kinds of things, when we have the time to have that conversation too. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. So I guess we'll go to council. Is there any questions that anybody like to move forward? Councilmember Sandberg, go ahead.
Okay. So I know that you have a lot of financial constraints ahead of you. How do you feel that the cities can support you in the issues that you're facing? I mean, because I feel like we come to you and we ask for our things along with every other city and every other interest. We're asking for things. And so, what is it that we can do to work synergistically to help you accomplish your goals at the same time as accomplishing ours? Because sometimes, I feel like, obviously, I think we're preaching to the choir. At least that's what it sounds like, that you support a lot of our legislative priorities, but not everybody else would support our legislative priorities. So what should we be doing as a city or as council members?
So I'll probably jump in right here, Trish. I think it's difficult for us to understand that the voters continually want to have an initiative move forward that has no funding, such as 1131, so a smaller class size. And I understand that they value small class size, they value the education system. We've really reached the point, if we are going to support education and support our families and our most vulnerable citizens, that we have to start talking about how we as a community need to provide some new resources for this state, whether it's redoing the tax structure, whether it's, again, the high income tax earners, but it can't come from us. There is no way the legislature can pass a tax that the people can't reject. So no matter what we do, it will go to the voters, and when it goes to the voters, the whole initiative will start to blow apart, as it has in the past, over taxing water and taxing pop, and then they reject it. So unless it comes from the ground up, then we are pretty much, our hands are tied. So what I'm asking everyone is to please talk to your community about your needs. Talk to them about your mental health needs, about being able to serve the families that are most vulnerable so they have housing, and talk to them about, you know, supporting the education system and saying you need to be a part of the decisions on this. Somehow we all need to get together and say there has to be some new revenue in this state if we're going to serve our people. I can't think of any other way to go, and I've tried really hard, but our hands are pretty much tied by the voters and the initiatives that are before us.
I was going to say pretty much the same thing. It really is about, you know, how do we pay for what we want? And I think most of us have been paying attention for quite some time now by the citizenry wanting this, this, and this, but it just gets more expensive, particularly when you're dealing with a state that's growing and as vibrant and as we are. But the tax structure, as the senator said, has changed to where more of the burden for paying for this is coming down to middle class and lower to pay for that, and there's just no way that can happen. People are taxed out. And I think the system is unfair in many different ways, but I'm not, you know, a fiscal expert. I'm not going to say what I think would absolutely work better. I've read some things, but we all know that we have the most regressive tax system in the whole United States by a number of different studies that have been done over the years. So what you have to do when you're talking to folks about what they want, and you know, this situation here in Bothell is that when people want something, how do you want to pay for that? It's different when the city council goes and asks for how you're going to manage your budget. In the state, some people would suggest, well, we're going to cut services. Well, we've been cutting services like crazy, and now the governor's even asked that they take 15% more off. Some of these services are going to go away if we don't maintain them or even put more money back into them. But where's that going to come from? We got McCleary hanging over our heads and a transportation infrastructure that's been falling apart. So if you always ask people, and I'm not saying to be argumentative, because I try not to be also, but how do you want to pay for these things? You know, and that the citizenry has to come to some understanding about, you know, that they need to change the way they want us to tax them in order that this be done. And if it's done by initiative, that hasn't been working very well for us. But if that's either proposed by the people or rejected by the people, it hasn't gotten us anywhere. So I would prefer that they let us, you know, govern the best we can, and they always have the chance to change that. But I think right now the political will is not there to really stick your neck out very far, because we haven't gotten the support of the people to do that. And when government, including city governments, county governments, are seen to be the problem in and of themselves, we got to change the way people respect the work that we do. We might disagree on goals or ways to get there, but we should still be respected by the citizenry we serve. And I think that there's not a lot of respect for government officials, and that's part of the problem right now. They don't trust us, or that's an easy cop-out for them to think they don't trust us, because that way they're not at fault. It's all our fault for things that are broken, and I don't believe that's true.
I'll just add to that over the past couple of years we have seen some ideas around flexibility for local financing. or just policy flexibility, policy changes to allow more flexibility in situations where we can't provide more funding. We can at least try to provide more flexibility to local governments, and so ideas that you might have around that are certainly welcome, and that might be a way that that we could accomplish something without having to go to to the general fund to do it. And I guess one great example would be tax increment financing, the TIF or LIFT, as has been done here in Bothell, resulting in a lot of economic development, is a great example of how some flexibility is able to help cities leverage your vision for what you want to accomplish. So we're certainly very interested in hearing ideas like that, or other policy issues where you see a way that that something could be accomplished apart from just going to the general fund. And then the other issue, I think local governments are have a little bit closer relationship with the citizens than state government sometimes, and we struggle, as I'm sure you do too, to just engage the public and help people understand what's going on, so that they can be informed citizens, informed voters, and so they can understand the decisions that are being made. So I look to local governments as real leaders in helping engage the public, and ways that you have of doing that I think are very appreciated, and just whether it's talking about the city budget or the state budget, I think the public benefits from being more engaged and more informed about what's going on, so they can kind of understand what's coming next and where we're going.
Or do you want to? Okay. Thanks again for coming to talk with us. I think it's important that we spend time before the session starts. I know you guys get phone calls from me during the session. It's just part of the noise, I'm sure. So there's a couple things I wanted to ask. Actually, I'll just kind of make one quick statement. So to the end where cities could potentially do more for the public, the 1% tax increase per year is an absolute crutch for us. In comparison, our general fund, where we can only increase it at 1% a year, and then we have dedicated enterprise funds for providing sewer service, water service, stormwater service. We're working on our budget right now, and those all went up 5%, 6%, and 8% for just 1 year. And in comparison, the 1% a year is what we can raise our operating budget. So there's a huge chasm that's started back at, I believe it was the Tim Eyman initiative, which I've been working for governments and been involved since then, and it had good meaning and purpose, I think, when it was first created. There was places where we could get more lean and that type of thing, but we're at the other end of the spectrum at this point, where there's no more fat, there's no more meat, we're down to the bone, and it's really looking at losing services more so than just trying to sustain, because everything's gone up 5 to 8% a year, and we can only go 1% a year. So I know that's in the APWA or AWC's legislative priorities is the 1% a year. So my question for you guys, I have a total left field thing here too, but so McCleary, so what does that mean? I don't have a real good understanding of what that means to your operating budget. So like to meet, fund education, that's a pretty, in the eyes of the beholder, that could be a lot of different things. So I'm just curious to you guys, does that mean looking across all of your operating budgets and saying, we'll cut everything by 15% so we can put it all towards education, or is it 10, 5, 50%? Kind of where are we at with what you've heard so far, I guess, in trying to meet the McCleary decision?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that McCleary actually outlined House Bill 2276. So in 2009, there was a redefinition of basic education, which meant that under the state constitution, we must fund it. And that's what McCleary said. By 2018, you must fully fund basic education as defined in 2276, House Bill 2276. That would be $2 billion a year from now to 2018. So the final figure was somewhere around 5 to 6 billion, but somewhere around 2 billion per year. So what we talk about is we can't cut services to families and support for families and social and health services and other things that are important to us and expect a family is going to stay healthy and the child can learn. That's really the bottom line, is that you're actually educating the whole child. You're trying to make sure that they have a healthy home, that they have food to eat, that they have, and when you start cutting those services, that's what you're hurting. So we're kind of in a position right now, as you said, where government's very, very lean, and we don't have a lot of places to go. But the courts have said that by the end of the first legislative session, they will bring in sanctions if we do not have a plan. And their sanctions can be, you must fund education first. Their sanctions could be, your budget's in freeze until you actually do fund education. They have lots of choices. Do I think the Supreme Court will back down? They better not. They better not, because you know what? If the people lose respect for the Supreme Court because they can't carry out their actions for us, then why would the people worry about what actions they carry out for them? So that's the dilemma we're in. And I will tell you that in 2009, when they passed 2276, I did not support it because I said we can't fund it. But I lost that battle, so here we are. And it's not a bad thing to have lost because it's a good thing for our schools, but the funding has to come from somewhere. I would suggest a high income tax on corporations or something like that. Other states have done it. We should be able to. And that's why you need to convince the public that we need to do something.
Yeah, we're only one of 8 states that doesn't have an income tax, and the other 42 do it in different ways. There's the way they mix sales tax property and their state income taxes. So there's got to be a way to do that. A lot of folks have said they would support it if they would change other things about the tax structure, particularly I think B&O's mentioned a lot too as being something that is structurally not very fair at this time either. I've heard my friend Derek here speak to that eloquently about how that's not working. But there's no political courage to draft a bill out of the legislature to start that, not after the recent 2 defeats on the state income tax. So, but I happen to agree that why a state as well off as we are is one of only 8 that doesn't use this particular method to do things. So. So much of the money is already committed in the budget ahead of time. Finding that $2 billion, just keeping their transportation operating budget, is hard enough to deal. Let alone the extra revenue package for all the infrastructure that's falling down around the state, highways and bridges, our ports. The very engine that makes the state, as well off as it is threatened by not taking care of these issues. I understand, or at least it's been said publicly, as well as some private meetings I've been at, that we're hoping that the Senate has to bring their transportation bill forward first, because we passed one out of the House twice, and the revenue package didn't go anywhere. So, and I've heard Senator King, who's head of transportation there, speak publicly in Everett a couple of weeks ago that he understands that it probably should come from the Senate first, because we need to make sure that the folks controlling the Senate send something to us so we can get working on that, and I prefer that happens sooner than later, because it's probably clear that McCleary, and who knows what's going to happen with the capital budget, McCleary for sure is going to go on for a long time, and possibly into special session, as we were talking about earlier. And I really hope that doesn't happen, but if people want to argue, they certainly can do that well into June, I suppose. In the meantime, it would be nice to get something out of transportation and get moving on that. Just infrastructure alone, I've heard low estimates of $20 billion needed here in the state of Washington, and more likely more than double that if we're really going to take care of what we should be doing here. And we couldn't even get $10 billion out, in the last package. So I'm hoping that as we look at the particular needs for Bothell and the surrounding areas that depend on Bothell, that's a conversation you have not only with the local folks here, but with cities and other officials that you interact with, so that you understand that anything you can do, because everybody supports the transportation revenue package, but it still doesn't come out. Business, labor, and enviros have all been together on this for about the better part of 2 years. When has that perfect storm ever existed in the past? And we still haven't got a bill out. So this would seem to be the session that, since those three groups are still asking for this legislation, that we get it out and we get it out fast and get something started, recognizing that there'll be other fights on education and capital yet, but hey, we got the right people all saying transportation, so why can't we pass a bill? You've got to sort of amp up the demand for this as soon as possible, and not waiting to see how things, kind of build up during the session. We're all on the same side. Make us get at least that package out as soon as possible.
Did the transportation package include preservation or maintenance and the ones that have come up in the past? Like,
I'm trying to remember all the
House
details of that
is the only
now.
one that passed one. We did not in the Senate.
Yeah, right.
But our fight in the Senate was transit.
okay.
Yeah. And then projects, the individual project. But I will reiterate that the court will decide at the end of the first session, not in June. At the end of the first session, they will decide what sanctions they will put on the legislature. So
Yeah, beyond just being in contempt, right?
beyond being in contempt. We already are in contempt.
That's right.
So it's going to be a whole new world.
Any other questions?
I just had one last thing that
Sure.
I've started to work on. My son goes to an elementary school here in town, and I've started to talk with the North Shore School District and have a cohort that's working with the Lake Washington School District. And what we've found is that a lot of elementary schools, at least in North Shore School District, all the elementary schools have sand fields, and they're horrible drainage systems in them. So when they flood, the kids can't use them. And then when they flood, the sand actually goes and runs into the concrete areas where they keep the kids when it's wet, and then it's really slippery and pretty much a mess. So, I just see a huge opportunity there. We don't have land. We have lawnmowers. We have maintenance people. We have some infrastructure set up for us. So it just seems interesting that we have 20 different sand fields all around, not just in Bothell, but in the North Shore School District, and they're pretty unusable most of the year. And wow, what a good recreational opportunity if we did something there to fix those up for general use outside of school hours, obviously.
Interesting.
One of those unfunded things, of course.
Right.
But
What grade's your son in? What grade?
he's in first grade, so I'm committed. And I have another one in the pipeline.
You're just
going to school.
beginning. But I think your idea is good. I think your idea is, I know how difficult Prop 1 was for the city, so there isn't like any easy answer to what the public will support. But they do support recreation, and a public-private partnership, might go a long way to using those fields for both public and private use. There's a great need for lots of fields out here, soccer and whatever. Mm-hmm.
I'm just worried about recess, making sure recess is fun for the kids.
If I had a first grader, I'd worry about recess. No, I do have a first grader. She's a granddaughter.
And I'll yield. Thank you.
Councilmember Agnew.
Well, I was going to ask very pointed questions, but I think you've answered most of them, and most of them revolve around funding. I mean, it seems like transportation's getting cut, education's getting cut, the liquor revenue and the marijuana sales, I mean, we haven't seen any funding there yet. Where are you guys going to come up with the money? Is that a fair question?
Well, let me see. Some people are talking about doing away with tax credits, tax incentives, something that you need to pay attention to because it's about economic development in your area. And the companies that take advantage of these tax credits and tax incentives are either growing and contributing to the economy, or they're not. So your people, which is really important because you're a high-tech corridor, need to be showing that those tax credits make a difference for them. So we met with Bowens last week. The Senate Democratic Caucus met with Bowens, and they showed us exactly what their tax credits meant to their growth. and the growth in the state of Washington and the employment growth. So if your people begin to get worried, your biotechs, your biomedical, you know, the different aerospace companies, small ones, tell them to show us how they benefit them. Otherwise, they won't be there anymore. Because that's the only place anybody talks about going. And there's not enough money in there to do what we need, but they should be alert.
And I'll add to that too. That tax incentives and exemptions are reviewed on kind of a rolling basis by a commission, and that commission reports to a committee called JLARC, on which I serve. And so we have a regular schedule of kind of reviewing all of those to see if they are serving their purpose, if we can determine what their purpose is, and I'll certainly echo the senator's comments that that's something to pay attention to, because as these things come up, we rely on public testimony to kind of give the context for how those are being used and what companies are using them and how that's benefiting the community. So or not. So those certainly will come under much more scrutiny these days as we look for places that we could sunset incentives that aren't working or things like that.
So on that subject, so when you're talking about trying to find new revenue sources and possibly sunsetting incentives that aren't working, would you be changing the bar for the level of tax credits to increase revenue? I mean, the thing that I found interesting in the news a couple of days ago was that there was a report that said that there are several American corporations that pay more money to their CEOs than they do in taxes. So they pay more to one person than they do, to the government to provide the services that they benefit from, that we all benefit from. And so I'm wondering that when you're reviewing the benefit of the credits that those companies receive, is it like on a case-by-case basis, or do they all have to meet a certain criteria, certain set of criteria?
So when they're reviewed, the staff review and the commission focuses on, first, what was the purpose for creating it, if that was stated or if that can be inferred, and then is it meeting that purpose? So if the purpose was to create jobs, then is it working? Is it creating jobs? If the purpose was to make the competitive situation for an industry in our state the same as it is in other states, then has it accomplished that? But there is now, I think, more pressure to put clearer measures in for transparency and accountability, so that when tax incentives or exemptions are created, we need to require a much more clear statement of why they're being created and then how that will be measured, how their effectiveness will be measured. And that's a change from past practice, so that when something's created, the staff won't have to try to figure out, well, why was this put in there? It doesn't say. It'll be clear. And it'll also make it much easier than, for the legislature, when we see these reports, to say, it's clearly laid out. This is what it was supposed to do, and it's working or it isn't. And we've got the measurements there. We've got the data that we can look at. So just getting that accountability in place, I think, is a big step forward. At some point, though, there has to be a decision then on whether it's worth what we're putting into it. And that sometimes is more of a judgment call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like if there was a set of criteria by which all of the benefiting institutions could be judged by, because what I heard was, big corporation A is getting this benefit, but little corporation B isn't. And where's the fairness in that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I just wanted to mention that what doesn't appear on our legislative priorities, but is important, we just we received information that the funds were not likely to be swept, so we didn't include it in the priority list, was RCO, was it Recreation and Conservation Office funding. The North Creek Forest has placed highly in 2 funding categories, and so it's our understanding that those funds are not in jeopardy. So we didn't put them on the priority list. But just because they're not on the list doesn't mean that we don't consider that a priority. But we just wanted to put that on your radar in the event that at some point in the future those funds did become questionable.
That is a good point to raise. They're on the WWRP list, and they did score very highly, but that does have to get funded in the capital budget. So it's not assured that funding will happen. That's something that will have to be negotiated during the session, and certainly can be impacted if capital budget funds are swept in various different ways into the general fund to meet the budget crisis there. So that's a very relevant point to bring up, that we want to make sure WWRP gets funded in part so that North Creek Forest can get that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Absolutely. There's no fund that's safe, trust me. At this point.
Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
It was an example I was hoping that Tammy could help me with, but I'll try to bumble through it. So, the Public Works Trust Fund, we usually get really good interest rates, obviously, on borrowing money from the state and then paying it back. And recently it's not there, so we needed to build phase 1 of the multi-way boulevard in Bothell, and we needed to finance that without Public Works Trust Fund, and the interest rate was 3.5, somewhere in that ballpark, I think it was. And just kind of looking at that, well, I mean, we've all probably bought a house or a car, and you look at the interest rate and it's tripled. That has a huge impact on us to be able to provide or build things locally, and it pays itself back. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but please reinstate the Public Works Trust Fund. It's a really useful tool for local governments to deliver the transportation needs that are needed.
And be sure when you're telling people when the money's not available, why it's not available, that money was swept, provide some other service or budgetary item, so that's not just some kind of chicanery in Olympia that took it away, that we can tell you exactly where the money went, and that way.
I'd like to know that, because I don't know where, because it has been swept.
Well, it actually has been swept in order for us to maintain the services that we have, and also, I mean, we have 3 responsibilities that we have to maintain. We have to do education, we have to do our prisons, and we have to do our what's my third one?
Pensions.
Pensions. and so there's no way that we can pay for these things without something revenue that helps us, because we've continually cut, as you said, to the bone over the years, and so we have to sweep from other funds now. That's what we have to do in order to maintain what we've got. And right now it's not just education, it's the courts saying you're not going to board people, mentally ill people, in the hospitals anymore. You're going to open up beds out there in those communities. So the courts are coming in now and saying there are certain things you're going to do as a legislature. And if we can't raise revenue, we have to sweep funds, because there's nowhere else to go. Mm-hmm. But if you want to, what we used to do years and years ago was really kind of interesting. We used to do what we called a budget game. And we went around to communities and showed them exactly what we paid for and what revenue we took in and what was paid for. And people were a little bit more educated on what was going on when we did that. That was a long time ago. But it's something that we might restore again if it would help the public understand.
If there was a budget for it.
Really small pieces.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I did have one. That's
go ahead.
Hogging the time. So I've tried to tap in, now that I'm a council member, I've been trying to watch what happens in Olympia more closely. And it's kind of hard to, like, if I have a specific item I'm interested in, try to track, like, where it's at, which bill it's in. Do you guys have any recommendations on where to get that information more readily for the public too? I know that you guys have the TV channel you can watch, which is awesome. It's like this channel, and but they have somewhere where we just quickly get the information and find out kind of what the status is of specifics.
Just email our offices. We'll give it to you right away.
Oh.
Yeah, all of our offices, just to say what's happening, what's the status of this bill, what's the status of this budget, and they'll send it right to you.
Oh.
All of our offices.
And there's some software, too, that you can use on the Ledge site where you can track bills, and it'll tell you where it's at from day to day, when hearings are coming up, and where you can look up the changes in the legislation and those kinds of things.
You can listen to TVW on the radio. There's nothing more exciting.
Just a little bit. All right, thank you.
No, but thanks for being interested. And we
Yeah.
used to, a few years back, we used to meet with the city councils in the early morning and have conversations about what was their priorities and how were they doing. So if you ever want to do that, we can do it again. We used to just kind of gather at a phone and everybody just talk to each other. So if you want something like that, we can do it too.
Good. Well, great conversation. A lot of my questions were answered, but I do comment, and maybe it goes into some questions about transportation and it seems like we have a regional transportation agency that's Seattle-centric, and we're not seeing anything that's being done in the commuter traffic. And that's why I'm interested in the East Side Rail. And somebody that rides a bike, and I know Councilman Rayum rides a bike, but I'm willing to, as one individual that does that, share the former rail line that's now a bike path to a smaller gauge commuter train, so that we can get people moving off the highway, get them on trains. And if you look at where all our bike paths are, they go to all of our communities, and they all kind of link up into Seattle and the major east side cities. And so the right-of-way is there. We don't have to buy right-of-way. We don't have to dig tunnels. All we have to do is be a good student of history and look at where all these communities popped up along a rail line that's now a bike trail. That if we could just go smaller gauge and have a rails and trails like other parts of the country, how they do that. We're not reinventing the wheel, where we could move people from along 405 and I-90 and I-5, up to Marysville, where we have, and down all the way down to Olympia, where we have all these traffic backups. Sound Transit isn't doing it by running a rail line from the airport to downtown. I mean, that's not helping anybody's commute.
That corridor, it's rail banked by the federal government, the Surface Transportation Board, and it can accommodate everything you said. You don't have to even change the gauge. It can work right now. There was $50 million put into upgrading that back in 2008 that was also swept out. And I'm trying to, working with some of the East Side Trailways folks, see if we can't get at least $20 million to work on that. The county council in Snohomish has purchased 11 miles of the track that they're looking at refurbishing. And yes, the trails and the bike stuff was going to come first because that's easier and there's a lot more support for that. But it is rail banked, which means you can never take away the responsibility to give that back for rail service if a provider shows up and does something. And forgive me if anybody's heard this story before, but I'm one of the original bus drivers for community transit. I came to work in 1976, and after a couple of years there, I heard about this light rail project that failed in Seattle, and all the money went to Georgia for their MARTA service in Atlanta. And I was asking the engineers and some of the planners there, well, when are we going to run a vote again? They basically said, you'll be retired before they ever get that up and running again. This is like about 1979 or 80 now. Well, I retired after 33 years, PERS 1, 2009, the week after they turned on that light rail from the airport to downtown Seattle. And we're looking at the same kind of operation on the east side here. When they start tunneling through Bellevue for ST2, and they're talking about huge dump trucks out on 405 every 16 minutes. You can barely put another smart car out there now, and we're talking for the better part of a year, dump trucks every 16 minutes.
Right.
You could haul that stuff out on the rail corridor to the diking districts, wherever else is going to use that stuff, and use the money that's going to develop that light rail to pay for improvements right now to at least run that out of the area. And that's been discussed, but the people who are sort of in charge right now are fixated on getting ST2 done the way that they've been planned to do it. That's why Bothell and Kirkland are so important to promoting an Upper East Side initiative to do what you're talking about, because it's taken Bellevue and Redmond the better part of 40 years to get what they're going to get in 2023 if it all comes in on time.
Right.
So when's it going to get out here?
Yeah.
So that's why it's important that, because there is some planning already been done, has to be re-updated, the engineering and all that, but there are folks who want this now, and I believe that Bothell is critical to that ever happening, is if this city council and the people here recognize that. I've talked to the minority leader, Dan Christensen. We share a boundary here on the Snohomish River, and those people are pouring out of the 39th district down through the 1st to get to the east side. They need to be engaged too, from Monroe and Snohomish, Sean, because things aren't going to get any better for them either.
No, it's not.
And this is all possible with the same gauge, diesel multiple units, which are already operating in other parts of the country, that we could do this. There was an initiative in California, in I think Sonoma, San Marin County, a citizens initiative that had those things up and running in 5 years. So we could have this thing operating even before they finished the light rail to Redmond, if we start now. But it's going to take a lot of dedication on the part of the city and local officials and the community to understand that if we don't do this, waiting for Sound Transit or anybody else, you're looking at the late 2020s at the earliest. And they're going to expect you to start paying taxes on that a lot before then.
Yes. Also, another item that's not in here that we've talked about in the past is with the, the tolling on 520 and the tolling that's going to come to the carpool lanes. They're going to be hot lanes now on 405.
I saw the lights today.
Yes, they're as that stuff is coming along, it's not going to help the traffic on 405, which means we're going to see more traffic through our communities, and the communities need relief for the impacts of these tolls as people are as they're driving through on the surface streets. So please keep in mind that we're being impacted greatly by the state's efforts to toll, and it's impacting our surface streets, our infrastructure, and all. And it's directly a result of tolling, and we need some relief to help with our infrastructure as well.
Absolutely.
So do you have any data on that, Del? I mean, what if we're going to actually respond to that?
I could only give probably anecdotal at this point, but I'm sure that we could look at, possibly look at past traffic flows before tolling and how they are now.
Because if you're, if you're going to ask for impact dollars, then you have to show that you have been impacted. And then it's possible.
And I know that we could probably show through different agencies just the drive time it takes, the impact and drive time also. So
it'd be good if you
yeah.
have some.
All right. Well, that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything further or follow up? Yeah, Joe.
Joe, if I can just wrap up if we're done with questions, if you don't mind. I just wanted to thank all of you again for being willing to be here, and wanted to highlight especially the effort, Representative Stanford, that you made with the Public Works Trust Fund last year. Want to thank you for that. Thank you for being a sponsor on that. And just wanted to finish with letting you know that we understand the difficulty with the education, the education funding. Wanted to make the point, though, that it can't be at the expense of local government, because we're all part of this. And if we can't build roads for the buses to drive on, it's the whole person that you were talking about, Senator. As a city, we have to be able to fund our part of it, as well as just the actual education. We need to be able to build roads. We need to provide public safety. And right now, we are not able to prosecute crimes that we used to be able to prosecute because of funding issues. That's why we keep hitting the nail about marijuana revenue and liquor revenue and those types of issues. We are literally not able to prosecute cases that used to be, that we have an obligation to prosecute under the laws, but we can't, because we're focusing on high-end crimes that we never had a responsibility for until, 6 years ago. So I just wanted to reiterate that and make that point for you, that it has a real impact, and it's not just about education. Our part of it impacts education as well. I know Judge Gelson is with us here tonight, our municipal court judge, and she felt strongly enough about this to come down here and sit down and show her support on this issue. And I just wanted to make that point with you as the prosecutor for the city, the judge for the city. This is an area that we need to just remember. Children need to be safe. They need to have safe roads to ride on, as well as have a good classroom experience as well. And I don't know how you balance that. I don't know how we balance that. We want to work together, though. We understand your difficulty, and as a city, we want to come along and try to find synergies and ways that are going to work for all of us. And I just wanted to highlight and appreciate you coming here tonight.
Great, thank you. I guess with the consent of council, if I would invite the judge up if she'd like to speak at all to add to City Attorney Beck's comments. Don't feel obligated, though.
I've been listening to the conversation, and I thank you so much for all of your time and support. I know that the senator has come and done a tour with me and have spoken about the issues of the court. And what Mr. Beck is talking about is what has been termed felonies. And so we are seeing felonies that are now charged are brought back down to the misdemeanor court. And in 2005, we had one of those cases in Bothell Municipal Court. In 2012, there was 48 of those cases, and in 2013, we had 118 cases. And we know that that trend is going to continue to increase, which causes great difficulty because of the legal issues are much harder and much more time-consuming, I guess. So it takes more time from the prosecutor, it takes more time from defense, and then it also obviously takes more time for the court, and there's more legal issues. Also, with having the felonies, you also have a higher risk defendant that's in the courtroom, which is a security concern. And security is very expensive. And so we are trying to balance both of those issues and keep our community safe. The other issue that I have seen while being on the bench, I was appointed in 2010. In, I believe, about 2012 is when I started to see a huge increase of heroin. And it's not being prosecuted in the counties. It's coming back to our courtrooms, and we're seeing a huge issue. And the reason, I believe, is it can now be smoked. Heroin used to always have to be injected. Most people don't like to inject a drug. But now they can smoke it. So I'm seeing a lot of middle class, 18 to 20-year-old kids that are in the courtroom that now have their drug charges, as well as they steal because they need the money for that. So you're seeing them stealing the liquor from Safeway or those big stores. And then also we see then a rise in vehicle prowls, in burglary charges, which are felonies. And so we're seeing increases in the crime rate because of, unfortunately, that drug, and then also by superior courts that are not, or the counties that are not prosecuting those crimes. And as Mr. Beck is stating, it's putting a substantial financial, I think, situation with this prosecutor's office, because you need now more people to prosecute those crimes. If they can't prosecute the crimes, then they make different charging standards, and then your community safety becomes lower. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just trying to go over your material here quickly, and I'm looking at the third paragraph here on the third page, which talks about public defense standards as mandated by Washington Supreme Court and the Federal Court of the Western District of Washington in the Wilbur decision. And now this has an impact, it looks like, on what your public defenders must do, and that's why some of the cases are moving down to your court because of the responsibilities they have here. Is that correct? Would you explain that a little bit?
I would love to. Mr. Beck, do you want to explain that, and then I can give any comments?
Yes.
Just because I know that you're
how it impacts.
Those two are only tangentially related. The public defender expenses are just related to the increased standards that we have to meet with regard to public defense. The Supreme Court rules that have been mandated, and then the court case as well, the Wilbur case that was decided by the federal court, has required us to provide public defense to a much higher standard. And it's much like funding education. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We can argue about what level it should be at, and I have an opinion, and other people have different opinions, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does cost more money. So that's public defense. The other issue, though, with regard to the felonies is only tangentially related in that the felony issue impacts all of us, the courts, the prosecutors, the public defenders. We all have to spend more time on these cases. And what the felony stems from is our at the beginning of the recession and then moving forward, our counties have obligation to prosecute felonies. And the municipal courts and district courts have the obligation to prosecute misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. The counties have, due to budget impacts, made charging decisions. They've instituted standards, charging standards, so that what would have been a felony before, what is a felony, they've drawn a line and said, we're not going to prosecute those cases. We cannot afford to prosecute the theft of a Bobcat. It's not worth enough money, let's say, or a car or whatever. And I'm not saying that's where the line is, but that's just an example. They say, a car worth $10,000, we'll prosecute. A car worth $5,000, we're not going to make that choice. We're not going to prosecute that. We've got to allocate our resources to more impressive crimes. And so what happens is our police officers are still out there arresting criminals. And so they have what would have been sent to the county before, a case that would have been sent to the county for prosecution as a felony is now being forwarded to my prosecutors in municipal court. It's a felony in everything and in every way, except the county won't accept it. And so what our choice is to either not prosecute or to find a charge, and usually it's an attempted. So it's attempted theft, let's say, versus being a theft that's a felony or something like that. And I'm just making things up at this point, but to give you the idea. So we file a lot of attempteds. They're felonies in every other way, except we call them something different and prosecute them as a misdemeanor instead of a felony. So there's a different penalty that's involved. 90 days to a year is all that we can impose. $5,000 fine is the maximum we can impose, whereas in a felony have much higher restrictions, much higher penalties. And so that impact of prosecuting those felony cases in a municipal court is much more complicated and much more expensive for the city both the prosecutor, the court, and the public defender to handle. So two different but related issues in some way.
And Mr. Beck, I'd like to also add for resources, that means the city is paying for the jail, not the county. It also means that Department of Corrections is now not monitoring a felony defendant. It's the probation officer or department out of the city. So it's not only just that it's taking prosecutor defense or more prosecutor defense and court time, it's also other resources that we don't have funds for that usually would have been provided by Department of Corrections, probation, county probation department, and then of course jail costs.
I've heard a lot about this in my public safety committee, at least particularly the public defender aspect in the Wilbur decision, but on this other piece, the felonies, you're calling?
Yeah, felony.
I had not heard that before. And it looks like the budget to do that, although connected to liquor and potential, marijuana sales, it's not just those areas that you need relief on. So there's not a particular piece of legislation you can ask for, right? It's just a matter of restoring what we used to give you and then some, right?
Exactly. So we we can highlight the liquor and the marijuana as connected resources that help. But there is a bigger piece we're looking for, and and I don't know the answer at this moment, but just to put it on your radar, we're looking for solutions to this funding of public safety, basically, and because we're a little bit at loose ends as to what to do about this issue, but we want to start at least with looking at liquor and marijuana revenue.
Would it be safe to ask at this time if the city has a position on the location of recreational stores or medical marijuana stores? Because that's been a problem in some other cities and counties about not allowing it, and then the preemption issues that we've looked at in the legislature about, well, if you're not going to allow the sales, we're not going to give you the money either. How that lands on you folks here in Bothell, and how you want?
I don't know that we're prepared to comment on that at this point.
Okay. Just so you know, I have to ask that question because the preemption is a big issue on the Government Accountability Committee as it relates to this area. And
I won't say anything, but I would just say that some cities that I have heard make the reverse argument, which is if you're not going to share the revenue, why should we allow these in our community? And you're saying, why should we share the revenue if you're not going to allow it in your communities? And so there's the cities look at it in a different way than the states look at it. But we do not. This city does not have a ban.
No, we currently do not.
A ban on location of recreation facilities.
But just the goodwill effort or the goodwill gesture of at least starting with the liquor sales, that revenue that we had before it went private would be, that goes a long way to the cities to maybe.
And we should not be messing with that. That needs to be restored as soon as possible. Yeah. There's no way we should think about ever changing that formula.
Right.
So I just need to go back one more time just to see if there's anything the legislature should do. If the counties are not obligated to prosecute certain felonies, why is there not a criteria? Why is there not a standard? I mean, is it just their decision?
It's county by county decision, elected prosecutor by elected prosecutor. The elected prosecutors are making these decisions based on their budget, and I'm not here casting stones at our elected prosecutors in the counties. They have hard decisions to make and hard jobs to do. So I don't want this to sound critical of them, but there's a gap that is, unfortunately, the cities we have no ability to shift. There's nobody for us to shift it to. And it's our citizens that are having crimes occur to them, and what it really means is, there's a lot of crimes out there on the very low end of things that we simply can't prosecute. And one of the things that AWC is doing is they're going to be proposing that possibly the decriminalization of driving with license suspended third. That's a small drop in the bucket, but it's a criminal. It's probably maybe the lowest crime that we prosecute, but it's a driving crime, but it is a crime, and so, if we decriminalize it, make it an infraction, I don't know what kind of ramifications that will have. I haven't really thought through it, but that's one of the things AWC is going to be exploring as a starting point.
Any other comments or questions? No? Well, if not, then I want to thank all of you for coming out and joining us tonight and fielding our questions and comments. And it was a pleasure to and informative to hear from you on your comments and your feedback. I'd like to wish everybody here a very happy Thanksgiving with you and your families, and to enjoy this holiday season. So thank you again. And with that, we'll be adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,